In 2022, we saw the release of WWE 2K22, which more or less served as a soft reboot of the WWE 2K series, since 2K20 was so bad that it literally left 2K with no other choice other than to start the entire series over from scratch. So as a result of 2K20 being as bad as it was, we got 2K22, and while it was good for the most part, I always felt like it could have been better. There were so many things lacking in 2K22 that would have made the game substantially more interesting, and as a result, 2K22 lost its charm super quick. It was fun for the first few months, but after a while, I started to get bored. Honestly, WWE 2K22 just felt like it was only there to tease us and give us a taste of what was to come in the future games. All WWE 2K22 really did was leave us wanting a WWE 2K23 more than ever. Well, thankfully, we wouldn't have to wait too long for that to happen, as by January 2023, we would end up getting our first glimpse at WWE 2K23, and it looked damn good. Besides the fact that it looked almost identical to 2K22, you gotta admit, the initial reveal trailer was pretty damn cool. The trailer centered around John Cena, who was not only gonna be on the cover of the game, but was also gonna have his own showcase as well. 2K23 from its initial reveal looked like it was gonna be far better than 2K22, which had me and everybody else pretty excited. Everything about the game just looked incredible, and that even extended to the cover arts as well. These cover arts are legitimately works of art, especially the Icon Edition. As we inch closer and closer to the game's actual release, we start to hear more and more things about it, like the fact that it was going to feature war games as a playable match type, which is honestly pretty cool. The game is also set to have a pretty heavy focus on the Ruthless Aggression era, which got me and everyone else more excited to play the game. WWE 2K23 would eventually release in March of 2023, and to say it was underwhelming would be an understatement. Looking back on it, I really think the hype for 2K23 was more exciting than the actual game. I remember watching all the trailers and seeing all the early gameplay footage from before the game had released and being pretty damn excited. When I played the game at release though, it just wasn't as exciting as I had hoped. It didn't really feel fresh, and it just felt like it could have been a content update for 2K22. Sure, it had war games and the focus on the Ruthless Aggression era was cool, but at the end of the day, it just didn't feel fresh enough to hold my attention for more than a few months. With all that out of the way though, I think it's time we dive in and find out what made WWE 2K23 so disappointing. The first thing I want to talk about when it comes to 2K23 is the gameplay, because it's definitely the best part of the entire game. The gameplay of WWE 2K23 at its core works the exact same way that it does in 22. Every core gameplay mechanic from 2K22 is still here in 23, like dodging, rolling, blocking, the combos, everything that made 2K22 as fun as it was carried over straight into 2K23. The problem is that 2K23 just didn't really change the gameplay up enough to make it feel different or unique compared to 2K22, and for me, I think that's why 2K23 was as disappointing as it was. I will say that while everything in 2K23 feels just about the same as it did in 2K22, the combo system in 23 does feel a bit more smooth and refined. Now maybe that's just me trying to cope with the fact that I essentially spent $120 on what was the exact same game from the previous year, but I swear the combos just feel faster and more responsive in this game than they did in 22. Other than that, I mean, the gameplay is literally the exact same. I honestly wish 23 had made more improvements to the gameplay, because if it did, it probably would have kept me playing the game for longer. Now, while the gameplay in 23 pretty much went unchanged, they did at least update some of the match types, and by that, I mean they only updated one. The match type that got updated in 2K23 was the Backstage Brawl, and all they did was take the Backstage Brawl area from 2K22 and put a spotlight in it. That's it. As far as the other match types, they still remain about the same as they did in 22. Extreme Rules matches in 23 are still a blast because there's no restrictions on where you can place weapons, and normal matches are made more fun with the combo system that was introduced in 2K22. The real star of the show for match types though is the War Games match, and I gotta say, it's a pretty good time. The fact that it took as long as it did for us to get War Games in a WWE game is still absolutely insane to me, but thankfully 2K23 was the game that finally made it happen. War Games in 2K23 is honestly the best part of the entire game because it works really well. If you know how War Games works, works, then you're familiar with how it works in this game. 2 teams of 4, 1 person from each team starts off the match, and over time, more people from each team enter, and the match starts once everyone from both teams is in the ring. It's definitely one of the more chaotic matches in the game, and it's made even crazier by the fact that you can bring weapons into the ring when you enter the match, which is honestly pretty cool. As good as War Games is, it honestly kind of sucks that it was the only new match type added to the game, as I feel they probably could have added just a few more to make 23 feel a bit more fresh compared to 22. But at the end of the day, I can't hate too much because at least we got something new, and you can really tell Visual Concepts put a lot of work into War Games to make it as fun as possible, so I'll give it a pass. Moving on to the roster, it's honestly pretty damn good. Sure, the roster is pretty much exactly the same as how it was in 2K22, but 2K22 had a pretty great roster, so I really don't see the problem. This game is notable for being Edge's last appearance in a WWE game before he'd leave for AEW, the first appearance of Cody Rhodes in a WWE game since 2K17, and it even featured Bray Wyatt and Uncle Howdy as DLC, which was pretty damn awesome. Now, much like 2K22 did with Machine Gun Kelly, Bad Bunny was added in as a DLC character, and you know what? I'll gladly take Bad Bunny over Machine Gun Kelly in a WWE game, because at least Bad Bunny actually makes sense to be in a WWE game. Sure, MGK has made appearances on WWE TV every once in a while, but Bad Bunny actually wrestled in the WWE ring. So Bad Bunny being a DLC superstar in 2K23 was honestly pretty cool. Now, as good as the roster is, it unfortunately suffers the same problem that 2K22 had with its numerous Rey Mysterio attires, except this time, the problem is John Cena. How is it that 2K15 had this problem solved in 2014, yet in 2023 they couldn't figure out how to put multiple alt attires on one superstar and call it a day? In total, there's 10 John Cenas in this game, and they're all their own separate characters, which is wild. Then if you have the DLC, you get Prototype John Cena, which takes it up to 11, and that doesn't even count the action figure John Cena in my faction. Well, before I lose my mind even further, let's take a look at the arena selection. The arena selection in this game is one of the most confusing messes I've ever seen. If you've ever wanted a wrestling game where half the arena selection consists of SummerSlam arenas and nothing more, this game has you covered. I swear this game probably has the most amount of SummerSlam arenas I think I've ever seen in a WWE game, but honestly, I don't think that's really a bad thing. SummerSlam is one of my favorite pay-per-views of all time, so much so that I've been to 2 myself in person, and to see all these different SummerSlam arenas represented in this game is really damn cool. As for the other arenas, they're fine. I mean, they're nothing I'd really complain about. The selection of NXT arenas in the game is pretty damn good, and the amount of Ruthless Aggression arenas featured here get the job done really well. I mean, this game had the 2005 Raw arena, the 2002 SmackDown Fist arena, and even WrestleMania 22, which was included as a part of the Ruthless Aggression DLC pack. Overall, I have to say Visual Concepts did a pretty good job with the arenas in this game. You know what they didn't do a good job with though? The other modes this game had to offer. So how about we get into talking about those, shall we? Well, if we're gonna talk about the modes, I think the best way to go about it is to start off with the modes that aren't really all that good. For example, My Faction. My Faction is legitimately one of the worst modes I've ever played. Essentially, all it is a card-based mode where you put together a faction and compete against other factions to earn rewards. Now, I've always said this about My Faction, but My Faction could have been cool if it was executed properly, but the problem is that it wasn't. First off, the biggest issue with My Faction is that the grind to earn new cards and other rewards for your faction is tedious as hell, and secondly, all the factions you compete against are entirely AI. Then there's Universe mode, which went completely unchanged once again in this game. Superstar mode is still here from 2K22, but other than that, it's still the same Universe mode that has gone unchanged and remained the same for years. Moving on to My GM, I will say that Visual Concepts did at least improve it a little bit by adding in tag titles, mid-card titles, and giving you more options for brands to control like WCW, but in my opinion, I just don't think it was enough. To make GM mode feel all that different compared to 2K22's. Honestly, the GM mode in this game still felt just as bare bones as it did in 2K22. Overall, GM mode in this game just isn't very good, and honestly, you'd probably just be better off playing SBR07's GM mode instead, because you'll get way more enjoyment out of it, it than you would with 23's GM mode. Now talking about My Rise, this game followed the same formula as 2K22, giving you both a men's and women's story to play through, and much like 2K22's My Rise, this game's My Career just didn't hook me at all. I think the women's My Career was a lot more interesting than the men's story, since it involves you being the niece of a former women's wrestler and WWE Hall of Famer, but as for the men's one, it's just not all that great. You're given a preset gimmick at the start of the story, so you can't even use whatever attire you created for the first few matches in the mode, and the story all around just isn't all that interesting. It's set up a lot like 2K22's where it's non-linear, so you're able to go down various paths and stories, but even then, it doesn't really feel like you have that much control over your career. I would have just preferred one long, well-written story like 2K19 had compared to this one where it's just broken up into tiny pieces. Well, with that, it leaves us with one more mode to talk about, and thankfully, I saved the worst for last. The 2K showcase in this game had a ton of potential. Then again, I said the same about the Rey Mysterio showcase in 2K22, and yet they still messed that up, so at this point, I'm really not surprised that 2K23 showcase ended up being a flop too. The whole focus of this game's showcase was on John Cena's career, but unlike most showcases where you play through the matches that the showcase superstar won, this one was to take you through the matches that Cena lost throughout his career. Honestly, this is the best possible way they could have gone about doing this showcase, as it allowed you to play as someone different each time rather than being stuck playing as John Cena for every match in the mode. The showcase takes you through 14 different matches spanning from the beginning of Cena's career in 2002 all the way to SummerSlam 2021 when he faced Roman Reigns for the Universal title. While all the matches are fine and good, the only real issue is slingshot technology. I've expressed my hatred for slingshot technology many times in the past, but in case you're not familiar with what it is, essentially all it does is splice real-life footage of the matches in with the animated in-game cutscenes. Slingshot technology is really just some fancy marketing term for we're too lazy to animate actual cutscenes, so here's the real match instead. I will say that the showcase does at least end with a pretty cool bonus match against Super Cena, so at least that's something. With that though, I think I've covered just about everything 2K23 has to offer, so I think it's time we go ahead and wrap things up. All in all, WWE 2K23 was pretty disappointing all things considered. Sure, it did some things pretty alright, but when you really look at it, the game is literally just 2K22 with very minor improvements. It didn't feel like a huge leap forward, and as a result, it ended up feeling pretty underwhelming. Between this game, 22 and 24, 23 was the one game that I had the least amount of playtime on because it simply just didn't keep me very engaged. It got old and stale pretty quick. That didn't stop Visual Concepts from releasing a more expensive Bad Bunny edition in October 2023 for $140 though. Who the fuck bought this?